Welcome everyone to the September 2022 Cybersecurity Forum. I'm Damon Nix. I'm the Director of Business Development at Impact Washington, the state of Washington's Manufacturing Extension Center. Really glad you're joining us today. Really excited about our special guest, Adam Austin from Totem is going to be speaking. We have an excellent panel of industry experts, manufacturing experts that will be joining us to follow on the conversation after Adam speaks. So we're looking forward to that. A little bit about Impact Washington. We're committed to serving the needs of all of Washington's manufacturers. We're proud to be the NIST MEP Center for the state of Washington. We know there are a lot of great challenges, big challenges out there for manufacturers, from supply chain to technology to workforce. We're here to help. If Impact Washington can be a resource for you, maybe even it's cybersecurity, we definitely want to please reach out, let us know. I'll put my email in the chat before in a second, but I definitely always want to make a reminder that Impact Washington is here to support your manufacturing needs. We have resources across the state. We'd be glad to talk with you, visit you, provide you with an assessment, give you some advice, brainstorm with you, whatever challenges you're facing. Impact Washington wants to be of service and support for you. And if you're a manufacturer from another state, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Alaska, there's a manufacturing extension there as well, and be happy to connect you with them. All right, so why are we holding these forums? For now, well over a year. Our goal has always been with the Cybersecurity Forum for us to build a community. We want to connect manufacturers and businesses with experts in cybersecurity, like we have today, as well as with the economic development ecosystem and other partners in community-based resources. We want this to be a space for cybersecurity learning, and it's a safe space to ask questions and get answers from the experts as well as from your peers. If you're new to the forum, I want to point out that there is an Impact Washington YouTube channel. And on the YouTube channel, you'll find all of the prior sessions recorded there. And excuse me, there's a lot of great resources on that channel. As always, I want to thank PNDC for being our partner in producing these forums. We absolutely couldn't do it without you. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carly. Thank you again for everyone joining us today.
No, Damon, thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your support and partnership, and just really thrilled to be a part of this program. And it is my pleasure to introduce our Executive Director, Denise Reiser, who is going to just welcome all of you, and then introduce our featured speaker today.
Thank you, Carly. Good morning to everyone. Again, my name is Denise Reiser, and we, in terms of this Love Fest, are also really excited to work with Impact Washington. There's several of your MEP account executives on the line. I think Brooke is on the line, and probably a few more that I don't know. So if you have a question for Impact Washington, don't hesitate to check with Brooke or Damon on this call. They do a lot of services, and it's probably the best kept secret for manufacturers. So I'm exposing it right now. Coming up next, we have a presentation by Adam Austin. He's a cybersecurity lead for Totem Technologies. They're a company out of Utah. It's a minority veteran-owned prime DoD contractor, and Adam has a decade of experience securing classified, unclassified, and HIPAA environment U.S. government IT systems. And he's worked with NASA, Medicare, Medicaid, and all branches of the DoD. And there's a whole bunch more to his resume, but I'm going to let him tell you about that. And with that, please join me in welcoming Adam Austin with Totem Tech.
Thank you, Denise. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's make sure that works properly. Okay, you seeing the screen?
Yes, looks excellent.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for the nice introduction, Denise. And what you left out was all the acronym soup behind my name. Various industry certifications, they are a mouthful, so it's okay. There are a ton of acronyms involved with cybersecurity. Bailey's going to be doing her best to keep up with some of the acronyms. Bailey, don't worry about all those things behind my name. They're just things that let me do work with the DoD. We do have on our website, totem.tech/acronyms. We have a whole slew of DoD and other cybersecurity related acronyms on that site as well. So our URL is totem.tech. But yeah, I'm Adam Austin. I'm very excited to be participate in the PNDC forum again. We've had a nice partnership with PNDC and Impact Washington. Many of our clients, in fact, are in the Pacific Northwest. We're out of Utah. I'm coming to you from Utah today. And yeah, I'm a cybersecurity lead for a peer organization, Haight Bay and Associates. We're a prime U.S. Air Force contractor ourselves. We run a logistics support contract for the Air Force for one of their weather sensing systems that helps missions, helps plan and execute missions from a weather standpoint. We are actually fortunate enough to be awarded the Small Business Administration's Small Business Prime Contractor of the Year award this year, and we're the Utah Veteran Small Business Contractor of the Year as well. We've been around since 2015. In 2017, we realized the severity, I think is the appropriate word, of the impact of the NIST 800-171 standard upon small businesses. So that's the standard that requires us, those of us businesses that handle controlled unclassified information, CUI, another acronym. Those of us that handle CUI have to implement the NIST 800-171 standard. That's a list of cybersecurity safeguards that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And we realized it was going to be a serious challenge for our peer micro businesses, really. So we're 13 employees. I would consider any business under 25 employees a micro business, but really all small businesses that fit under the SBA's definition are going to be face some serious challenges implementing this standard. So we launched Totem Technologies in 2017 to bring our DoD related expertise to our peer small businesses. There's some of my contact information there as well. I'm happy to chat, converse through email about any of these subjects that we're going to be talking about, but I want to focus today on CMMC scoping. CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. I'm sure many of you attending are familiar with that certification process as well, that the DoD hopes to finalize in 2023 and include that in contracts. The first step, though, in complying with CMMC, which means implementing the NIST 800-171 standard, among other things, the first step is not to start on the volumes of paperwork that will need to be generated, nor is the first step to go rush and buy cybersecurity technologies, magic black boxes that you can put in your network that solve all of your cybersecurity problems. Those boxes don't exist, but even if they did, that wouldn't be the first step. The first step is what we call scoping, wrapping our heads around the nature of the problem. So the nature of the footprint of our IT system that supports the handling of the federal government information. And by handling, I mean storage, processing, and transmission, and then also protection of those assets that do that. So wrapping our head around what assets that we have in place that handle the information or protect the information, and then categorizing those assets according to a scoping guide that's actually been published by the DoD. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to start by, before I talk about scoping, I want to set the stage with this diagram here that we'll be revisiting several times through the presentation. It's admittedly sort of cartoony, but it will serve the purpose for depicting a very standard IT environment that we encounter many times with our, or encounter very frequently with our manufacturing clients. In fact, this IT network diagram reflects Haight Bain Associates' own IT network in a lot of ways. We don't manufacture per se, we're more maintenance, repair, and overhaul, and then shipping. But many aspects of this very typical network we do employ. So I'm going to describe what we have going on here, starting at the bottom, and I'll sort of work my way around clockwise. These graphics depict in an abstract way IT assets. And we have sort of blocked off here with this green dashed box representation of physical building, a brick and mortar headquarters, maybe a campus even, if you operate more than one building. And within that campus or within that building, we'll have some sort of border protection, a firewall, VPN, virtual private network gateway that allows remote access from the inside out, basically providing some protection for the rest of the stuff inside of the network. We'll have workstations. So those of us that handle information, we're doing that on a day-to-day basis through desktops, laptops, tablets, maybe even mobile devices. So we have operator workstations connected to various types of servers and services within our internal network. The most common, really ubiquitous type of server that we all manage are enterprise resource and planning services, ERP services. So I have those types of services depicted here by the ERP server icon. Many of us have to print out information. So we have printers, maybe scan it back into PDF format. So we have printers and scanners connected to the network. These little lines, by the way, mean these things are connected, okay? Many of our manufacturing clients transfer the code from the servers or operator workstations to the actual machines, the things that build the products, manufacture or mill. They transfer that information using USB sticks, maybe even DVD. Some of our customers, in fact, many of them actually just have a direct connection between servers and machines. But here we're depicting it through what we call sneakernet. So we copying information to a USB and injecting that information into the CNC machine. Once the products are machined, manufactured, whatever, there's often some test and quality checks that happen. Many times using automated IT equipment. So we have test equipment represented here. Excuse me. And frequently that equipment's connected back to the network through either direct hardline connection, or in our case, we're representing the connection with a Wi-Fi icon here. So not necessarily encapsulating all aspects of an IT system in a brick and mortar headquarters, but many relevant aspects here. We also may have, and this is true in our case, folks that work remotely, work from home, like an estimator, let's say, for instance, in this example, working on a mobile workstation connected through their home network router through the internet, which, as my colleague Patrick likes to call the dirty internet, like we have no control over bad guys and girls hanging out here on the internet, but nonetheless, we must use it. It's a necessary tool in our modern day IT system. So we could have connections through home routers through the internet to, let's just say, VPN into the mothership, the home office, the brick and mortar office. Many of us, in fact, we don't have a single client that doesn't use some sort of cloud services. We have represented here one very typical cloud service, Microsoft 365 Commercial. We also may use customer portals like DIBS from DLA, the DoD Safe portal for secure file sharing, maybe ExoStar for those of you that are managed by larger prime contractors that use the ExoStar supply chain platform. So that's a cloud-based service. Our customer workstations are going to, in turn, connect to those customer portals. And we also, many of us, operate our own secure file shares. These are, I'll name some brand names: Cocoon Data, File Cloud, FTP Today, Prevail, Box, Dropbox. Those are examples of cloud-based secure file sharing. So we may have connections to those as well. We may transfer some information upstream in our supply chain to our suppliers and vendors through this secure file shares as well. And many of us are backing our data up into the cloud as well. So we've represented cloud-based data backup here as a component of modern day IT system. And then for those of us that aren't quite big enough to maintain an internal IT staff capable of managing the entirety of our IT systems, we tend to outsource to managed service providers, MSPs. And so our managed service providers, these are the outsourced day-to-day IT folks, they will interact with our IT system through their workstations, often connecting through the internet, maybe into management tool consoles. So our MSPs use tools like RapidFire, like ConnectWise, TeamViewer, those types of troubleshooting and IT system maintenance consoles, cloud-based, but connect through the internet into our system. So there's all these various, both internal and external connections that are part of modern IT systems, even for the smallest of small businesses. And the larger your business is, the more likely you are to have more and more external IT system connections, cloud-based services. Okay, so this is a graphic depicting a very typical IT infrastructure for manufacturing environment, especially those in those small business manufacturers. Let's talk about scoping now. So next slide here. Now we've overlaid another box. This blue dashed line depicts the true boundary, external boundary of this IT system for this very typical small business manufacturer. And you can see the boundary certainly encapsulates all the brick and mortar headquarters. The mobile remote user working from home, it encapsulates those IT assets as well. And then you'll see it slices through some of our cloud services. So there are portions of cloud service and managed service IT system, even though they're not located on premise at our brick and mortar headquarters, there are portions of those services that nevertheless we retain security responsibility for. Cloud services operate in something called a shared responsibility model. The cloud service provider is responsible for securing the physical IT assets that provide those services. So those data centers, the personnel that staff those data centers, the internal networking in those data centers. But we, the user, the consumer of the cloud service, is responsible for configuring usernames and password requirements, multi-factor authentication requirements, ensuring our users, only authorized users can connect to that service, ensuring that authorized users only connect over approved connections and means. So we have some responsibilities, even though we're outsourcing a lot of the requirements, the security requirements, to the cloud service provider. So when we talk about scoping in a CMMC paradigm, and I'm making an assumption here that most of you are familiar with the stratified nature of CMMC. There's 3 levels to CMMC. CMMC level 1 is for all DoD contractors, because we all, no matter where we are in the supply chain, whether we're prime or 5 or 6 tiers upstream as a supplier or vendor, we all handle some kind of federal contract information, some kind of FCI, some kind of information related to executing the service or building the product for the Department of Defense. And under CMMC level 1, essentially the entirety of our corporate IT infrastructure, including portions of cloud services, are in scope. In other words, they are, we must abide by the CMMC level 1 protections and in place implement those cybersecurity safeguards across the entirety of our organization. There'll be few of us that are in a position where we can carve off portions of our IT system into what we call an enclave or a protected isolated security domain. and only apply CMMC protections to that enclave. But really, that's there's a very small subset of us that are able to generate an enclave. Most of us are going to be applying CMMC level 1 protections across our entire enterprise. So everything encapsulated within this blue dashed box here. What does that mean? It means at CMMC level 1, we have to put in place what we call the FAR 17. So there's a FAR clause 52.204.21 that is injected into most federal government contracts that requires 17 basic cybersecurity safeguards to be put in place, and really across the entire enterprise, across the entire entity, the entire company. We can distill those 17 requirements down into 6 basic capabilities. I'll work my way up from the bottom here. So one of the capabilities we must have as an organization is to prevent the accidental sharing of FCI. For example, we need to train users to be very careful when they're emailing, that they don't accidentally put the wrong recipient in the to line. And so that, especially when they're emailing federal government contract information, make sure that we don't accidentally spill FCI in that manner. Similarly, we must make sure that all of our media is sanitized when we're finished with it. So that means shredding paper media that contains federal government information. It means destroying hard drives that have ever stored federal contract information. Next capability, we must be able to identify and fix system flaws. Those flaws come in 2 flavors: vulnerabilities, like missing operating system and software patches. We all are sure familiar with the monthly Microsoft patches that happen on our workstations. That's a security flaw being patched by Microsoft. The other flavor of flaws are misconfigured or non-hardened IT systems. So like using default passwords on a Wi-Fi router is a flaw, and we must remediate those flaws. Number 4 is kind of low-hanging fruit. We must protect systems from malicious code. In other words, install antivirus at appropriate locations, like on our endpoints, our workstations, and our servers. The good news with capability number 4 is that all of your modern day endpoints come with some sort of antivirus baked into them out of the box. So we're covered there. We just have to make sure that the antivirus is working appropriately. Number 3, we must control logical and physical access to our systems. Physical access means locks on doors and windows, surveillance equipment, intrusion detection alarms. Logical access means using implementing things like usernames and passwords to get digital access to our systems. So these 4 capabilities are really what the FAR 17 boiled down to. Our assertion, though, is that you can't do any of those if you haven't identified the systems you're going to protect, and then describe those systems in both narrative and graphical form. Graphical, like I've done in that the couple previous slides where we depicted the IT architecture and then drew a line around what's in scope. In other words, drew or encapsulated and determined what assets we need to engage capabilities 3 through 6 on. So this is for federal contract information at CMMC level 1, implementing the 17 basic protections called out by the FAR clause. It's a little bit different. It gets actually significantly more complex when we start talking about handling controlled unclassified information, CUI. And that's CUI is the more sensitive subset of FCI, deemed controlled unclassified information by a government agency. So when we talk about CUI, we're talking about CMMC's level 2 and level 3. We focus on level 2 because most of our clients are going to be targeting a CMMC level 2 assessment. So we have developed a compliance methodology, 3-phase compliance methodology, and we'll focus on phase 1 for the rest of the presentation here. And phase 1 is determining the CUI scope. It's got 4 steps. The first step is to identify the specific CUI elements that your organization either currently handles or anticipates handling in the future. Now, this topic is worthy of a whole presentation in itself. I will, though, if you're not sure what CUI your organization handles, I would refer you to the source of truth on this, and that's the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA. Excuse me, I got a bug in my throat this morning. Archives.gov, and this link here, and by the way, I'll make these slides available through PNDC after the presentation. This is the definitive list of CUI categories, and each category has subsets with examples of types of CUI. For example, there is a defense index of CUI with 4 categories. One of those categories is controlled technical information, which consists, among other things, of engineering drawings. So the drawings that you use to put together parts in a manufacturing environment. Also consists of software source code, so that's very relevant for us at HatePay. But we want to identify specific, as granular as we can, the specific CUI elements. It's going to be very important, as we'll see later on. So I'm not going to say that everything in our environment, all the FCI is CUI. It's not. Very specific things are CUI. The next step after you have identified those elements is to move on and characterize the CUI lifecycle in your environment. On the next slide, I'll take you through briefly how to conduct a characterization exercise. From that exercise, naturally will fall out a list of in scope, in other words, in scope, I'm losing my words, but the hardware and software assets that you must implement the 800.171 standard upon. And we'll graphically depict that. We'll go back to our little IT diagram here in just a minute. And then there is a CMMC scoping guide published by the DoD, which allows us to categorize those hardware and software assets according to the way they're used in our environment and potentially differentiate between differentiate the level of protection that those assets require. And we'll depict that graphically as well here in just a second. So let me talk about briefly characterizing the CUI lifecycle and what the result of that exercise is. It's actually a pretty simple exercise. And it goes like this. You'll gather all the stakeholders in your organization. So executives, IT folks, users, operators, security staff, if you have a security staff. And as a group of stakeholders, you will ask a series of who, where, how, when, why, what types of questions for the CUI elements as they move through the life cycle in your IT environment. So in terms of receipt or generation of CUI, who do you receive it from? Or is it all generated internally? Or is it a mix of both? Do you get it from the customer? Do you get CUI from upstream, from your suppliers, subcontractors, sub-tiers, and vendors? Is it all internally generated? If so, who does that? Where is it done? How and why? And just jot notes down as part of the stakeholder meeting for receipt and generation. Likewise, it's CUI. There are specific marking requirements from the DoD, marking and handling requirements. Who in your organization is going to be responsible for identifying it as CUI and marking it such? And how are they going to do that? Like literally, what workstations, what software are they going to use to do that? And list all of those assets. Same for storage, long-term retention. Is it stored locally on workstations? Is there a file share either on premise or in the cloud? Sort of reiterative here. Are you storing anything externally or in the cloud? How, why, what software, what assets are used to do that? And then in terms of accessing and processing the information, is it done locally only on workstations? Do you do it over a network? So do you have like network-based computer-aided design servers, or is all of your CAD software installed locally on workstations? Those are the types of questions that you ask during this exercise. Do you need to disseminate or send or transfer the CUI anywhere, especially externally, upstream to your suppliers and vendors, downstream to your customers? How? Why? Who's authorized to do that? What software do you do that with? What workstations are authorized to do this dissemination? And you'll get a list of assets here. And finally, the last step in the life cycle is, or the last phase in the life cycle is disposal. We have to dispose of all federal contract information, including CUI, in accordance with another NIST standard, the 800-88. And it's got some pretty strict sanitization requirements. For instance, the only sanitization method for paper FCI is destruction, either through shredding or burning. So you're naturally scoping in a shredding service. How about your printers? Have you ever thought about the fact that most of your modern day printers store a copy of everything that's printed on a hard drive on that printer? If you're printing FCI or CUI off of that printer, you're now talking about a contaminated printer hard drive that requires sanitization and disposal. So you undertake this exercise as a group of stakeholders, and naturally, the result of this exercise will be a list of hardware and software assets that support these phases of the life cycle. Any hardware and software asset that either stores, processes, or transmits CUI as part of any phase of this life cycle is in scope, as are all of our assets that protect those assets that are in scope. So by undertaking this exercise, you'll naturally get a list of the hardware and software assets that are in scope in some way, shape, or form. You will also, as a result of this exercise, get a sense for how CUI flows in your environment. So now we're back on this graphic depicting the typical IT architecture of a small business manufacturer. If I overlay on this graphic purple dashed lines that indicate where CUI is allowed to or supposed to flow in this environment, we start getting a sense of the assets that truly handle not just the FCI, but the CUI, and this is going to be important. So for sure, we have CUI on our operator workstations on the ERP server, transferred to the USB, transferred to the CNC machines. Likewise, test results are considered controlled technical information when they're test results on a DoD product. So the test results from the test equipment is CUI transferred through the Wi-Fi back into our network. If we print paper copies like travelers, work instructions, those sorts of things that go along with a part during its manufactured life cycle, the printer and scanner is in scope because it's handled CUI. And wherever we transfer that CUI externally through customer portals, through the secure file shares, backing up to our cloud services, those components, external components, are part of our CUI scope as well. Notice some of the places that by policy, we don't transfer CUI. Like there's no reason for our managed service providers to have any kind of access to our CUI. They're not doing the DoD work that requires access to that CUI. They're just helping us maintain and protect the systems that do that work. Let's, for the sake of argument, say that our estimator also has no reason to handle CUI. They have reason to handle the contract information, but not the technical information about the DoD products or services. So there's no CUI flow over here. You also, some of you may be aware of this, some others of you may not be, but the commercial tier of Microsoft 365 is not suitable to handle CUI. It's okay for your FCI, but not for that more sensitive subset of CUI. There are tiers, there are flavors of Microsoft 365 that are suitable, but if you're running commercial right now, it's not. So by policy, you would restrict CUI flowing to Microsoft 365 commercial. Why is that lifecycle characterization so important? It's because when we start talking about CUI asset scoping, which this graphic depicts, and if I put in the overlay the CUI flows on here, there are many different types, not many, there are several different types of asset categories that have been determined by the DoD, and depending on the asset category, that will dictate how much of the 800-171 standard you have to implement on those given assets. So it gets pretty complex and pretty tricky. This is a rudimentary cartoony type of diagram of an IT system for a manufacturer, and look how complex this looks. But by being very particular about how we scope our systems, it can save us some work in terms of implementation of cybersecurity safeguards, as well as save us some cost when it comes time for that CMMC level 2 external assessment that may be starting as early as next year. So just a brief run through of the asset categories here. Green means a full COI asset. That means that asset is by its nature destined to handle CUI in some manner. USB sticks, servers, workstations, printers, Wi-Fi. Those are for sure CUI assets. They handle CUI purposefully. Security protection assets, the red color here, are those assets that help protect our CUI assets, our firewall and VPN gateway. Notice that here that we have to scope in our managed service providers though, their workstations, their cloud-based consoles and tools help protect our system, as does the entirety of the brick and mortar facility. Helps protect our CUI assets. So these are scoped in. CUI assets and security protection assets we must implement the entirety of the 800.171 standard, 110 controls, 320 assessment objectives, and the CMMC assessors will be assessing these in their entirety, the full scope of 800.171. But there are a couple of different types of assets, risk managed, and you'll see that mobile workstation at home from a remote office or at home network router, Microsoft 365 commercial. Risk managed assets are those that could conceivably handle CUI, but by organization policy are prohibited and or prevented from doing so. And these assets, we do not necessarily have to implement the entirety of the 800.171 standard. And when it comes time for CMMC assessment, the CMMC assessors will simply be looking that we manage the risk of these assets appropriately, whatever that means for your business. So we can get pretty creative here with the risk managed assets. And since many of us operate older legacy types of machines and test equipment, that it would be exceedingly difficult to harden to the NIST 800.171 standard, we can deem those types of assets specialized. So specialized assets are your like operational technology, your programmable logic, your industrial control systems, your SCADA systems, your automated test systems. We have to manage the risk of these systems, but we don't necessarily have to implement the full 800.171 stack of cybersecurity safeguards on these things. So some of the risk mitigations we would put in place would be to isolate CNC machines, for instance, to separate subnets or domains or VLANs. The cloud-based assets that we have some control over that are in scope, that do have CUI flow, we have some shared responsibility. We'll need to make sure that those cloud service providers have a FedRAMP authorization or can meet FedRAMP moderate equivalency. In other words, not only in place all of the 800.171 standard, but an additional couple of hundred controls that are part of the government's cloud authorization program. So we have some shared responsibility and responsibility to make sure our cloud service providers are up to snuff. Then there are fully out of scope assets. These are assets where CUI might flow to, but we have no control over those. Our customer portals, DIBS, DoD Safe, ExoStar, we have no control over those. We want to make sure that there's some sort of service level agreement in place that we understand, but the customer portals, the customer workstations, those are going to be out of scope. So we don't want to take responsibility for things that we cannot secure, that we have no insight into. But all the rest of this stuff that is not colored black is in scope, and we have to address it in a system security plan, address it in a diagram like this, and make sure that we, on the fully in scope assets, implement the full 800.171 set of controls. And for risk managed and specialized assets, we make sure that we manage the risk of those assets appropriately. It's very important to do this very granular scoping because the 800.171 standard is no joke. There are 110 safeguards grouped into 14 families. And really where the rubber meets the road, there are 320 assessment objectives listed in a companion document, the 800-171A, also published by NIST. It's to this standard and using these assessment objectives that we have to do our self-assessment to generate an SPRS score. And then for those in-scope assets, we have to apply all of these requirements. We call the assessment objectives organization actions. If we're going to be assessed on these objectives, we better make sure that we're doing them. We better make sure that we're addressing them in an SSP. So it's vitally important that you understand the nature of scoping and exercise that scoping exercise in your environment so that you can determine specifically what CUI elements you have and what assets handle purposefully or could handle but are prohibited from doing so. That's CUI. All right, that's the end of the presentation. We do have some free tools for you at Totem Tech. We publish all of our templates, all the stuff that we use in-house at Hate Bay for free to you all from a free tools page. We run a quarterly workshop that dives into all of these topics way more in depth. It's spread out over 10 weeks. Gives you a lot of opportunity to get your hands dirty building plans if you hadn't done so yet. And we also offer a managed service called Zcast, Zero Client as a Service, for those of you micro businesses that are concerned about implementing 800-171. It's a challenge. So I want to thank PNDC and Impact Washington for inviting me to talk about scoping. You probably can see I'm just scratching the surface here. So I hope you all have some great questions, and I'm excited to talk with Rick as well. So thank you, Denise, Carly, and Bailey. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for you, Adam, and then I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Hopefully Carly and Bailey are tracking those. But I noticed when I looked you up, you do some cybersecurity apprenticeship program. Do you feel like talking about that?
Yeah, so we offer summer internships to college students, and we call it a cybersecurity apprenticeship. So if we work out together, they'll transition into a full-time career with us. We also offer that to transitioning veterans as well. So veterans that are interested in starting a new career, or maybe even those veterans that have a little bit of IT background, we'll train you up on all things CMMC, all things cybersecurity, really small business cybersecurity.
And do you have to live in Utah to be a part of that?
No, we prefer that you live in Utah, but it's not necessary. We've had apprentices work remote with the occasional visit out here. It's beautiful out here, especially in the wintertime. And we're about 20 miles from 2 really cool hidden ski resorts.
Okay. The second question I had is, as we're dealing with this CMMC information that's coming at you, can you update us on the timeline for CMMC at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So CMMC is not a thing yet. It's in kind of pilot phase right now. That's not the word the DoD uses, but the DoD aims to finalize the law that will allow them to include CMMC requirements in contracts in March. And they will publish that in March of 2023. That published rule will go into a 60-day comment period, which we as the public get to comment through the Federal Register, complain, give it the thumbs up, whatever you want to do. That 60-day period will end in May. So the DoD anticipates being able to inject a new DFARS clause, DFARS 252-204-7021, into contracts starting in May of 2023. The problem with that timeline is right now there are exactly 0 certified assessors. So these are the folks that will be hired by C3PAOs at CMMC third-party assessment organizations. And at level 2, CMMC level 2, we'll have to hire those like we would an ISO auditor. We'll hire a C3PAO to do an independent objective assessment of our implementation of 800-171. there's nobody that they can hire right now. And the exams for those certified assessors won't even be finished won't even be available until December of this year. So I think that's a very aggressive, ambitious timeline that the DoD has set for itself for May next year. I think it won't be a reality for us, most of us, until later in calendar year 2023 at the earliest. That being said, there are 120 requirements with 320 assessment objectives. There is a lot of work to do. And so we cannot be dragging our feet. This is not a days problem. This is not a weeks problem. This is a months to years implementation problem. So do not stick your head in the sand. Do not drag your feet on the implementation of the current requirement, which is to implement 800-171 if you handle CUI or need to prepare to handle CUI.
Okay, I have a question come in on how would a hosted phone system fall into that scope?
That is a great question. So if you communicate your CUI verbally across the phone system, it's going to be in scope. I mean, where the CUI goes, assets are in scope. All right. That means at a minimum, you have to monitor the most likely VoIP, that's voice over IP traffic for that hosted phone system. I'm assuming it's not a plain old telephone hosted phone system, it's IP based phones. And you have to, at minimum, limit the use of VoIP and monitor it. And if you're going to be transmitting CUI across it, you're going to need to look at encryption as well, which is tricky with VoIP. So your better bet is to prohibit VoIP systems from being able to be used to communicate CUI phone systems.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions from the panel? You can either ask it in the chat or you can raise your hand and ask it. But I while we're waiting for those, I want to give you a chance. First of all, Adam said he would share his slides. So that question's come up a couple times, and he during his presentation said he would share those.
I will.
But Adam, you also have an online looks like a workshop you offer, or cohort program. Do you want to talk about that real briefly? I'll give you a second to talk about that.
Sure. It's Totem.tech workshop. We've actually had PNDC and Impact Washington cohorts join us for these workshops. They're 9 weeks in length. It seems like a lot, but it's a couple hours a week, and we take you soup to nuts. Everything FAR 17, DFAR 7012, NIST 800-171. How many acronyms can I put in a sentence? CMMC, explain the requirements, and then put in front of you and at your fingertips tools that will help you develop the necessary plans that must be in place to abide by these requirements: system security plan, plan of action and milestones, incident response plan, as well as templates to save you some of the legwork from developing those things from scratch. And then plenty of time to ask specific questions about specific implementations at your organization. So we keep these cohorts small, no more than 20 participants. We run them through our friends at Gavology, one of the premier government contracting training suites or training organizations out there. So they host the workshops. Yeah, that's a little bit about that. I appreciate you letting me chat about that.
Yeah. So I have a question that just came in. It's, what significant challenges have you experienced facilitating a business culture of security and compliance? For example, NIST controls that are not technical in nature, but people and process oriented. I think that's probably a good question.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is building the culture. So impressing upon executive leadership that, first of all, this isn't going away. All right. Second of all, that nobody else is going to buy into the program if they don't buy into it, and if they don't eat their own dog food, so to speak. So that's a constant struggle, because security is not convenient all the time. there will be changes to the way that business is conducted by implementing the 800.171 standard. A perfect example of that is multi-factor authentication. It's not enough to have a username and password to access your CUI systems. You must also have second token, second factor of authentication, like an app on your phone, a little hardware dongle, a smart card, something like that. And it's just not convenient to have to carry those things around or be able to access that second factor of authentication. So
Okay.
building that culture is a challenge. We have some free tools on the free tools page. One I'll draw your attention to is called the CUI Employee CUI Handling Guide. That's been putting that together has been a real blessing for us in being able to communicate really quickly to our employee base what is and what is not CUI in our environment. And it's a 2-pager. It's a 1 sheet that we actually print out. Actually, I have a copy of it right here. So we actually print it out on cardstock. One side has a table of all the CUI elements in our environment and how we're supposed to mark them. And the other side is a brief set of protection instructions that at the line worker, the operator level, they are trained on that. And we have these things as a resource, and we have them posters around the facility. So that having the tangible tools like that goes a long way to establishing culture, goes a long way to establishing the fact that we're taking this seriously, and it is serious.
Yeah, I mean, Bailey, can you see if you can find that on their site and post a link? So I think Bailey's still there. Things just magically appear. So I don't know if she's still there or not. But I do have a question from Chris Wiggins at Cyberstreams. Chris, you want to turn your mic on and ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Great having you here, Adam. I've actually followed a couple of your webinars previously, and you've been kind of a very valuable resource for somebody trying to learn how to, implement CMMC for people. Do you find that companies are like overscoping or underscoping when they come to you originally and have an idea of what their network is? Do you find that they're choosing too many systems, or they're not putting enough into that scope?
Not enough by far. They tend to downplay. Well, actually, you know what, Chris? Lately, it's been the two extremes. They either tend to assume that all FCI is CUI and just throw their hands up and say, well, we're going to have to put 800.171 everywhere. Or on the other extreme, they say, yeah, this isn't a real thing yet. We've never received anything marked CUI, so therefore we don't have any CUI. And they have really scoped in nothing in terms of CMMC level 2. And I have to gently remind them that, well, there's this, or instruct them, educate them, there is this registry that from NARA that shows you all the CUI. And, oh, by the way, you're a manufacturer, and see this thing marked ITAR, this engineering drawing marked export control, that's a CUI category in itself. So all of these engineering drawings that have export control that you've been dealing with for 2 decades, those are now all CUI, or really have been CUI since 2010. So I would say the majority are underscoped like that, Chris, with more and more overscoping where they're just like, everything's in play, and it's not.
Okay. Michael,
Appreciate it.
LEGE, you have a question? Do you want to go ahead and turn your mic on and ask it?
Sure.
Mike?
Yeah. So earlier, Adam, you were speaking that a few contractors would actually be required to implement an enclave. And I was just kind of wondering if you could expand upon an enclave, and also for a company that is strictly on-prem, does that mean that since they're not using any cloud services that they would require an enclave?
Okay, great questions. I'll answer the first one. It's not that some of us will be required to develop an enclave. It's that some of us might be in the enviable position that we can carve off a portion of an IT system or develop from scratch a new separate IT system where we only use that IT system for our CUI. I say fortunate position. Hate Bay is not one of those organizations. In 2015, when we won our contract, we had 90 days to spin up an IT system from scratch. And as you can imagine, security was an afterthought for that. And over the course of the years, CUI has been commingled with all of our other corporate information on the system. So our entirety of our IT system, which is well depicted in this graphic here. We don't have the machines and the test equipment, but everything else we do have. It's all commingled now, so it would be exceedingly painful to try to extract the CUI and separate it into an enclave. An enclave is, by NIST's definition, a isolated security domain, meaning a separate IT system or portion of your IT system that has both user access control and network traffic flow control implemented upon it. So you have both a separate user access mechanism as well as its own firewall on that enclave. And it's either logically or physically separated from the rest of your IT network. That could be a cloud service, by the way. You could go with Microsoft 365 GCC High, turn off the ability to share any information out of that environment to your local workstation, and use virtual desktops and have an enclave set up like that. There's lots of ways to approach enclaves. And by the way, in the CMMC scoping guide, which is on, I'll put a link to this in the chat. It's also in the slides, but the scoping guide and level 2 scoping guide here describes enclaves and isolated security domains as well. So let me put this in the chat real quick. The second part of your question was, if you're all on-prem and don't use cloud services, we have yet to have a client that doesn't have some sort of cloud service. Because even if you're outsourcing to an MSP, a managed service provider, most likely they are using some kind of cloud-based consoles that are going to be scoped into as security protection assets at a minimum, shared responsibility at at a minimum shared responsibility, at a maximum security protection assets. So I would be very surprised if I encountered a system that did not have some sort of cloud aspects. If you truly don't, then it's not necessarily that your on-prem, I guess your on-prem IT architecture is kind of like its own enclave. But you really wouldn't call it an enclave. You would call it an enterprise IT system in terms of like SPRS scoring. An enclave is very specific, particular, like either physically or logically separated subnet, separate network from your corporate IT network. It's a good question though. 2 good questions.
Very good. Well, I want to move on to sort of grab Rick into this in this conversation. I think you guys will have a good dialogue, but first I'm getting asked if you presented on CMMC, I think it was 1, and people are asking if you're going to come back and present on 2 and 3 levels. So I'm asking you now, can we have you back?
Sure. I presented on 1 and 2 today a little bit.
Okay.
But I'm happy to on 2 and 3 more specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Second up, let's bring in Rick Rosenberry. He comes to us from USI Insurance. Rick, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Tell us a little bit about your company, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah, happy to do it. So I am at the Portland office, but we have 150 offices around the United States, specifically one in Seattle that I work very closely with. And I have been specializing in working with defense and aerospace contractors, and been going to the CMMC forum and trying to learn as much as I can in the last year. And I really appreciate you touched on things that level 1 contractors are going to be doing, because I think that's kind of an underserved area with the information that I've been receiving these shows. So I really appreciate that, Adam. But I specialize in, helping people understand their cybersecurity insurance. And then we've also been working with incident response plans to make sure that all the dots are connected when you do have an incident, that somebody with all US employees and somebody that can be going in and accessing things is the one that's doing that, and that the money is there for them when they go to do it. And there's not any, arguments on pricing or anything. We want to get those negotiated beforehand.
Okay, so this part of our program is designed to be interactive. So if you have a question, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand. And if I don't see it, hopefully one of my co-partners in this will see it and ask your question directly. But first up, how does what you talk about, Rick, merge with what Adam has gone over? How do you see the interaction and the play between a provider and an insurance company?
So when it comes to the talk today, I mean, a lot of companies are asking, where do I start when they're getting their security up? When it comes to insurance, when is it a good idea to get it? But going through these steps and identifying, the insurance companies are always trying to look from the internet side at what they can see as far as open ports, and they're doing scans now. But if you can work with a professional like Austin to really identify your network, where information is traveling, and really get down into how information removes around and who has control to that information, that's an amazing thing, not only for your own protection, but to be able to get the insurance that's required for any contracts that you have. People have saying, it's hard to get cyber insurance, but really there's only a certain amount of insurance in the market right now. And so the companies that are differentiating themselves and are able to show an organized plan, those are the ones that are having access to this insurance. So it really isn't, if you have the things and you have somebody that can help you show the insurance carriers that you have it together and you're different than all the ones that are getting losses, there's plenty of insurance out there for you at a reasonable.
Adam, do you have a comment on any of that?
Yeah, I was going to ask, Rick, are you all inspecting as part of like pre-policy issuance incident response plans from prospective policyholders?
So it really just depends on the size for companies, on what the insurance company is requiring. But when it comes to customers that are involved with CMMC, are going to be, we definitely want to sit down and look at a response plan and build that around their CMMC goals and any regulatory requirements they're going to have, and make sure that they have. And we're trying to incorporate people in in this network that the PNDC has. There's lots of great companies that are doing forensics and data recovery. So I'd like to, give back to those people if we can.
Yeah, the incident response plan, as you probably know, is required for CMMC level 2. It's required by the 800-171 standard. It's one of the 3 big plans that you must have: SSP, POAM, incident response plan. So there are assessment objectives and controls that dictate some of the content of that incident response plan. I was just wondering if you all, that was the nature of my question, if you're inspecting this.
Yeah, so a lot of customers that we're working with that are heading towards level 2 aren't coming out and asking for it as far as their relationship with the insurance companies. So I'm trying to be proactive and incorporating that.
Very good. Go ahead, Adam.
I was wondering if, Rick, if you all have data on like average cost of a cybersecurity incident.
Yes, and I can do calculations for anybody. But to give you an idea, let's say you have a manufacturer that's in aerospace and defense. They have 10 million in sales. They're working mostly business to business. If they have a full loss, and this is excluding CMMC regulatory costs, I'm not sure what those are going to look like, but those are covered. I'm seeing anywhere from 1.2 to 2.4. So usually we're doing at least 2 million in limits, and then we're doing breach cost outside the limit. So that gives them an extra 2 million that's dedicated to forensics and data recovery. And so that usually leaves enough. So 3 million is what I would like to get for most people.
Yeah, so it's a 7-figure loss that they could be looking at at a minimum without insurance.
Absolutely. So outside of defense, teeny losses, like oops, something happened, those are looking like 150,000, and that's for like a small oops.
Yeah.
Not a big hack ransomware attack.
Very good. Adam, you look like you had another question.
I'm just pondering that as a business owner.
Yeah. I would like to see if we've got Michael Downing and Dean Vincent on the line. Do you have any comments on what we've just been talking about?
Hi, Michael here. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
My comments are from just immense appreciation for this presentation, because I view this system diagram and the categorization of these assets to be paramount for both understanding your environment and demonstrating security. It's really hard to put together a plan without this information, especially if you don't have a solid understanding of where your external connections are and where sensitive data lives in your environment. So as much as I can, I like to recommend that people take this diagram seriously to get a better understanding of their environment and where their next steps are. So thank you very much, Adam and Totem Tech.
Very good. Dean, are you here? And we also have Chris Wiggins from CyberStreams on the line. I think you folks are a cybersecurity company as well. Do you have any comments as we go further?
No, just kind of the cybersecurity insurance thing is like of vital importance. We actually now require it of any of our customers, even outside of CMMC, because it's something that the risk is too great to not have cybersecurity insurance for your business. The biggest thing that I find as a benefit is in the event of a breach, you're not relying on your own team to that problem. The insurance company is going to bring in a fleet of people to minimize their own loss. So you're going to have their resources to kind of back you up in the event of what's needed for a recovery. So I'm glad you guys are pulling on, insurance companies as part of this conversation.
Yeah. Mr. Vincent, do you have a question? You turned your mic on. D. Vincent? No? Okay. I do want to ask Rick, are banks and financial institutions requiring like I know when I have a mortgage on my house, they require mortgage or some level of homeowners insurance. It's the same thing on financial finance in the defense and space?
Yeah, so as far as defense and overall commercial, some of these requirements are starting up at the top for larger companies, and they're seeing them when people are doing M&A, merger and acquisition, and it's starting to trickle down. I've been working with a couple of national banks and looking at how are they calculating risk working with a client, and where does that fall in? So we have some classes and things that people are going to, but this is definitely something you're going to see down the line, where banks are requiring that. And when you are looking at capital, having a plan and having that insurance can help set you apart for getting a loan as well.
Very good. Is there anybody on the line that has cyber insurance that would like to make a comment? And I can't see everybody, so turn your mic off and and just speak on that. Okay, how about questions for Adam and Rick or Chris and Mr. Vincent and Michael Downing? Do you have any questions? Dean, do you have a comment?
We did get a question that came through regarding how does cyber insurance differ from a typical organization looking for coverage to a cybersecurity / services company?
So the types of policies, so if you're providing, you don't have to be specifically a cybersecurity, managed, but if you're managing data for people, tech E&O is the coverage that you would want, technology, errors, and omissions, and that is a coverage for any mistakes or things you could get sued for while working in somebody's system. And especially in the high risk world of defense and aerospace, if you're attached to a system, quick story, a company, they were working on a system, everybody knew they weren't involved, but they were there at the time. They got drug into a lawsuit. It took 18 months before they got out of court. And that was in a situation where everybody knew that they weren't actually involved. But they still got drug into this huge, long process. This is an aerospace provider. They didn't have coverage. Luckily, they had a giant parent company that was able to foot the bill. So if you're working in these areas and you don't have it, even if you're not, a managed service provider, if you're just an aerospace company that's doing anything like that, it's something that you should have, because when it hits the fan, everybody gets pulled in. And you're not going to have coverage for defending yourself, even if you're in the right, without the cybersecurity coverage.
Adam, you have something pulled up there. Do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, I was going to say we actually do have cyber insurance at Hate Bay. And then as Totem Tech, as a provider, we have the E&O, like Rick was talking about, just to cover. But what we're looking at here is actually another NIST document, the 7621, so you can Google that. But it's NIST's recommendations for small businesses to implement an overarching thing that they have called the cybersecurity framework. So it's not as specific as CMMC and 800-171. This is just the cybersecurity framework is general best practices for cybersecurity for any industry. And one of their keys, there's only about 24 recommendations in this document. One of them is to purchase cyber or explore getting some cyber insurance. So it's, our NIST is really the preeminent cybersecurity standards generator in the world, in my opinion. And if they're recommending it, it's something to take seriously.
One thing I'd like to say, not all these policies are built the same, and even a standard agent won't be able to tell the difference in some of these things. But as CMMC gets going, and then we start to see regulatory penalties, most policies only cover regulatory penalties that are included for disclosing personal or business identifiable information. But we take coverage to include all federal and foreign regulatory bodies that may have something that may present you with fines, and so not just a very small traditional. So we want to make sure that you're covered for whatever regulatory body is going to be issuing you fines.
Okay, and I actually, we ran into some folks from the FBI that have asked to come and talk to you folks about some of these things. Carly, I know you talked to them the other day. Is that something you're going to do coming up?
I was reading another message from you. Who did I talk to the other day?
No, I was talking about the folks from the FBI. We had talked, they wanted to speak about cyber. Is that going to be on the docket for one of these panels?
It's a conversation. I've reached out to them and we are fully booked throughout the rest of the year when it comes to these sessions. But I think that they would be a great addition to have on to be a part of the panel. So definitely possibly November. It'll depend on their availability.
Okay, very good. Well, does anyone have any further questions for this panel? Or comments?
I was just thinking about real quick, Denise, the FBI. We get questions all the time, or we get phone calls from people with their hair on fire saying, my system's actively being breached, right? And they suspect that it's some criminal activity. And they're like, what should we do? Should I call the sheriff? I'm like, no. Do not call local law enforcement. They will have no idea what to do. The law enforcement that you want to reach out to is the FBI. If they can get to it, they may be able to help you. But really, like, you're going to be relying on the managed security service providers out there that help do incident response and forensic analysis, and then insurance. Like, the FBI is already swamped with large scale cyber crimes. Your little business is probably not going to be on their radar, and definitely not the sheriff.
I think what they wanted to talk about is just to support what you folks are trying to provide for and stress the importance of that, but I'm not positive about it. That about wraps it up for us. Wanted to again thank Impact Washington. I know Brooke is on. I'm not sure Damon is on. He's at a conference, but he probably is on and paying attention going forward. If you like these programs, we're trying to set up 2023. We really want a lot more manufacturers to be involved, and that is the goal for Impact Washington. So please send either Damon Nix from Impact Washington, or like I said, I think Brooke is on the call here, Brooke Duvall, and Carol Bladen, or myself and Carly, a message on what you'd like to see in this space. And that's about it. Thank you so much, Adam. I actually thought it was very informative, and Rick, it's always good to hear from you and the rest of our cyber folks on the call. Carly?
Yeah, just want to point out, Bailey just sent it in the chat. If you all could take a moment and click the 3 ellipses to the side on the right-hand side of your chat, it will download all of your personal messages that you've shared with folks today, as well as the generic chat. So you'll have those acronym definitions, as well as the questions that were asked. So we'll give you a moment to do that. And other than that, we will look forward to seeing you all at our next Cybersecurity Forum, which is scheduled for Tuesday, October 18th. And we will look forward to seeing you all then. And with that, we are going to conclude this forum today.
And then doesn't Impact Washington send out a recording or something? How does that work?
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do that. So we will have a recording of this program. It'll get uploaded to the Impact Washington site. And when you receive your post-event email, we'll include Adam's slides, and then as well as a recording of today's event. So you will have both of those items available for use.
Very good. All right, you guys, make it a good day and a good rest of the week.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.